Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 20-minute webinar series this week. I am so excited to be here with you to show you one of my favorite topics that has to do with NKBA standards. If we haven't met yet, my name is Vanessa DeKukuk, and I am going to be walking through some of these common scenarios that will help you prepare for the NKBA certification exam. There's going to be a lot of live demonstration today, so let's jump right in. Before we get started with the live portion for today, take note that there is a lot of information available through the NKBA if you're interested in sitting for your certification exam. So just jump out to nkba.org/certification for more details. Now, when it comes to working with 2020 design, there's going to be a handful of plans that you'll need to submit to show the solution for the problem that you're given in the exam. So those main plans are going to be broken down into a construction plan, a floor plan, a mechanical plan, and then one major wall elevation. So with all of these plans, these might be things that you're used to drawing, or you might be more familiar with some than others. One big thing to make note is all of your drawings have to be printed to scale when you submit them to the NKBA for the certification. If there's any of those plans that you would like a little bit of a refresher or need a little more information, definitely check out the graphic standards that are reviewed in the Kitchen and Bath Design Presentation book. This is by far your best resource. You can go in and it has examples and describes what needs to be shown and included on each type of plan. One of my biggest recommendations is to try to draw your plans how you're comfortable. Notice off to the side there, it does note that in the certification requirements, you're actually allowed to draw by hand or with CAD software or combine both to show your design solution. Now there's a handful of things that I'm going to be using in today's example. I'm going to be demonstrating in 2020 design, but the version I'm using is very important. We added some new features that will help show the NKBA presentation standards better and faster. So if you're currently working on an earlier version of 2020 design, you can still draw your design solution, but it's gonna take you a few more clicks to get to the presentation standard that you might want. So I am working on version 12.2. Anything 12.2 and above is going to be great. And you can be using 2020 Design or 2020 Design Live. I'm also going to be using a word processing tool. In my case, I'm going to be using Microsoft Word today, and that's just going to help me with my floor plan descriptions and notes off to the side. And then finally, you're also going to need a PDF printer. Now you might already have this. If you're on Windows 10, it comes built in. If you don't, you can go out to the web and look for a free PDF printer. And then we're also going to use a website that will allow us to merge our PDFs together to create one complete document when we submit this for our certification review. Okay, so let's move over to 2020 design and start looking at our project. Now I just have a blank project open, so let's save this really quick and we'll just call it example NKBA. Now, the first thing that I'm going to suggest doing is take some time and think about setting up your schemes, your templates, your preferences, all of the things in the software so you don't have to stress over solving the design problem and managing the software. So one of the first things I can do is come down to the bottom, and these different tabs at the very bottom can be super useful to set up ahead of time. For instance, I might come in and double click on one of these tabs and rename this. I'm going to call this one floor plan. And then I'm going to call this one mechanical. And then finally, let's call this one construction plan, because this will give me a much better, clear idea of exactly which plan I'm working on at which time. And we can set up a lot of this ahead of time. Now, of course, I'm not going to draw an entire plan from scratch in 20 minutes. So let me come over and open up a project that I have already started. And we're going to take this example and just copy it over into our new example, just so that way we can save a little bit of time. So I'm copying and pasting this project over. Notice now that when I look at the different plan tabs at the bottom, it will allow me to have some preset views for each one of those plans I need to print in a little bit. Now, many of you, you might agree with me or you might not, depending on how you learned.
I would encourage you to actually spend some time hand sketching that first solution before you're in the software. So if you are not comfortable hand sketching, that's okay, but just think again, the goal here is you want to solve the problem that you're given, and then I will be able to plan everything out from there. Now that I've got my plan, okay, I've got everything in here, it's basically the cabinets and the architecture generally is done. Let's start by focusing on the floor plan. Now, the floor plan is actually probably going to take the most just because we need to outline a lot of detail. You might find it helpful to actually go in and adjust a few things. Like I might turn off my display grid, just those boxes. Do you need that all the time? Well, especially because I'm not planning anymore, maybe I don't need that so much. I might also want to go in and apply a legend. Now, if you were looking real close earlier, I actually started in the legend tab, but I'm going to recommend to come in here and switch this over to the NKBA scheme. Do you notice that there's two now? Now this is something new in 12.2. Our classic is the older scheme that we had available with some basic view settings, but this NKBA or 2020 NKBA has a few new things where notice that I can go in and look closer at really great details, like we've predetermined the center line for you. We've broken down and actually have readable dimensions, much, much, much easier. So on some of my plans, like my floor plan, my mechanical plan, I will usually start with that basic 2020 scheme. NKBA scheme. Then I can go in and any additional edits I make, like I said, like the grid or changing any of the views of things that will help. And then I might even come in and ask the software to build an automatic legend for me. And I'm just going to do the simplest view possible, this user code. Okay. Now, this is not perfect for what I need for the certification. It's great when you're doing a quick spec check, right? Because you can just see it has auto-numbered everything for you and given you a list by part number or nomenclature. But usually in what they're expecting for the certification is a bit more of a description. So remember a little bit earlier, I recommended having a tool like maybe just Microsoft Word accessible. Imagine you could go in and type up in Word or Excel or whatever tool you're comfortable with, kind of your item list. Okay, so ideally this legend or this list of items is going to be numbered. You're going to describe your items one by one. And then if I'm using a tool like this, I could just copy it. I was Control and C for copy, or you can right click and copy this. And then you can come back into your plan and say, you know what, I would really like to annotate a note and add my own legend with my own details. Notice I can right click and paste, and that's got a little more information. It didn't really like my inches mark, so I'll just adjust that a little bit so it looks good. Say okay, a little bit more definition, more detail. It'll say what you want because you want to call out the really important things, like maybe you have a recycling bin, maybe you've got some very specific things that are not always as easy when you're reading nomenclature because every catalog's different, right? For just transparency, I am using a sample catalog, but you're welcome to use any catalog you're comfortable with. Just think of the descriptions. If somebody doesn't know that line, you want to describe it in a way that anybody could understand what you're planning or what you're specifying. Okay? Now, you could spend a lot of time in here making it great, making it beautiful. I can come in here and say, oops, floor plan specifications and give it a really beautiful detail. A lot of these things have their own display settings, so whether you're setting that up in your scheme or you want to customize just one area, like this one I just might want to make bigger, you want to go in and that little bit of detail is going to look a little bit more professional overall. Now, obviously I only put 2 for time, just as an idea. Copy and paste that out. Another reason I use Word is because it spell checks for you. Makes it much, much easier. But if I'm done with this legend, like I still want the numbers, I maybe just don't need this anymore. I will right click and go to display settings and then literally just uncheck display. That will turn it off on this tab or in this view so that way we don't have to print it. Oops. I'm having a hard time clicking both, so I'll just drag them over so they're a little closer. But imagine this list will reflect all of the numbers that I have placed here. Okay, now a couple other things when it comes to notes. One that's really easy to miss or forget is they ask you to note the ceiling height. So you'll want to make sure that you have some sort of detail here. If I remember correctly, this one is a basic, just a 96-inch ceiling. The other thing that we don't always see as much in a floor plan view in 2020 is NKBA asks for the floor type to be drawn in. Okay, now a lot of us render, but a rendering from this viewpoint is not required for the certification. So if you have like a wood floor or you're planning for a tile flooring, what you'd probably want to do is through annotations, just use some of the basic draw settings. Like I can draw lines to denote, where the planks of the flooring, wood flooring might go. Or maybe even easier, if you're specifying a tile, you could come in and use a rectangle or a square. The nice thing with some of these, notice in the lower right-hand corner, I can spec the size too. So super basic, I did a 12-inch tile, but really nice, I can just take this and copy and paste it again and again to make sure that I'm saving time. I'm able to draw this out really quickly. Maybe I want it staggered. So you want to be able to draw just a hint of the type of flooring. You don't have to do the whole entire thing. Just give them an idea of what the flooring type is and adjust these. Now, I might not want two types of flooring here. So let me just kind of move this guy down so he's out of the way because I'm going to have some other things up here. One more detail I'm going to need on my floor plan a little bit later, I'm going to want to see an elevation, let's say for this north wall. I can, of course, double-click in the placement zone to pull that elevation up. We'll look at him in a minute. But when we work with elevations, we need to give it an identification, like which wall are you showing? You only need one elevation for the certification. You want to pick the wall with the most to show, right? In a kitchen, that might be a little tricky. Like there's a lot of things happening in here, but maybe that range wall would be really good. So to bring in an elevation marker, one really easy way is just to come in and use our symbols shortcut. This is under the Items tab. The Symbols button kind of looks like a blue gear. And when I come in here, this gives you access to a lot of different symbols we'll continue to use, but I'm looking for wall identifications, and you can see like here's wall number 1. What this is an option to be able to drag this in or place this. Sorry, I wasn't in drag and drop list. To place this, I'm going to pick the placement zone. That way I know it's kind of attached and pointing to that wall. And when I right click, I can kind of bring it back. Now you might say, okay, that looks good, Vanessa, but you're missing something because you'll notice it doesn't tell me anything. Normally in projects, you're going to see numbers or letters or something to denote, like what is that matching to? So notice if I go into the attributes, you'll see as it thinks, a floor plan description. So it defaulted to 1. Maybe I set that to A just so you can see it. But again, you might go, well, Vanessa, I don't see it. It doesn't show A. That's just because somewhere in the display settings, there is a label that's not turned on. No worries. We can come in here and we're going to go under General. We're going to look at our plan elements and notice that the symbol shows this type, this color, but you might want to turn on the label. Just in that particular scheme, it wasn't preset to be on. No worries, I was able to turn that on pretty quickly. In a pinch, if you have a hard time finding a specific thing, could I have gone in and annotated a note and typed A? Absolutely. But now this could link essentially to this. I'm going to change the name of that elevation so I know this is going to match here. Now, we're almost done. I have one more thing on this floor plan. Obviously, you would make sure you've got all of your details on here, and then you might take a look at it and go, ooh, this is kind of hard to read. Another thing we've added in version 12.2 and above, if you're looking in your annotations area, I almost went to the wrong one, there is a label section where traditionally our labels used to kind of follow the placement zone. Now there is a setting that if you click Align All Labels Horizontally, notice it's a little bit easier to read both your dimensions and the labels on the cabinetry. So just for something a little cleaner, that can definitely help that floor plan view. All right. Ooh, I got a lot left to go. If you're still with me, I'm going to jump to the mechanical plan. This mechanical plan, in this example, you'll notice I had started on the NKBA tab. but there's a couple things. It inherits some of the details that I did on my floor plan. For instance, this elevation. If I don't need that marker, I can, again, of course, go in. I just double-clicked, and I can go back into my settings and consider turning off my symbols, but I might need other symbols. So in the case there's just one thing you don't want to see anymore, I can right-click and I can go in and say, you know what, let's change those display settings so I don't see that one item. This is the display setting just for this tab, so it's still there on the floor plan where I need it, but I've turned it off right now for the mechanical plan. Okay? That comes up a lot with different items. Like from here, I might go in and actually place something like lighting. I'm in the room catalog, and let's go out to make sure I've got the right one. Let's set this up to room fur. There we go. Now if I go under lighting and I go to place a spotlight, like a recessed light, notice I'm going to drag and drop this in. I'll place one here. You probably going to place a number of them because this mechanical plan needs to consider all of the lighting in the ceiling. Little trick, you can use your placement wheel and you can set this to copy something a very specific distance away if you want. Let's say 36 inches. Let's see if I've got it on my copy option, and we'll bring in a few. Okay. So again, just to save some time, of course, you're going to line this up and have it set exactly how you want. But here's what I want to point out. We've got all of our lighting in here. That's great. But notice that all on our floor plan, the lighting showed here too. If I don't need that, we can either, again, go in and set the display settings, or in this case, because it is lighting, I can also go in and look for my lighting. Notice under miscellaneous, I can turn lighting off to make that a little bit easier, again, to manage and keep each one of my plans clean. So you can see, honestly, the most difficult part is making sure you're viewing the right display settings on the right tab. That way, when we get to print this, it'll be a lot easier. From here, a couple other little small tricks. I'm going to come back in and look for my symbols. Under the symbols, you're going to find things like the switch outlets, additional lighting options. For switches, maybe I have a three-way switch that I need to place here on this wall. Let me turn off the snap just for a second so I can place it quickly. And maybe there's going to be, let's say, another one over here, but then it takes a moment to do. I'm going to have to come in and kind of make sure these are all tied together, right? How are we planning all of this electrical? I would probably use, again, an annotation like a spline and say, I want to connect this. I'm going to temporarily turn off my ortho just so that way it's very organic looking. And then I can go in and you get the idea. I'm going to basically connect all of these here. We'll go again from here, give it a little bit of a curve. And once I'm done, you can either print it like this where it's a solid line, or on certain elements, you might want to take things and change the display settings. This time a little bit different. I'm going to make it a dashed line. So in certain cases, you might show things dashed when it's at a certain height. Sometimes you'll see things like this where you're stringing all of the lighting together. Obviously for time, I would do all of these, but that's an idea of what that might look like. All of these types of symbols too, you'll want to bring over like an example of each one and create a legend off to the side. Similar idea to what we did on our floor plan, but I would usually type a lot of it just using the notes field right here. Okay. All right, now jumping over to this construction plan. This one, you could actually do a little bit of pre-work on here and thinking, this is great. It gives me that overview, general, idea of what the solution looked like. But a lot of times the construction plan needs to also show what changes you've made. So if you've ever taken the time to draw out a few things, let me show you what I mean by this. This is an example of a legend that you might find on a construction plan, right? The existing wall, the wall removed, closed opening. So you definitely want to show if you're making changes like removing walls, but this, all it is are notes, and again, drawing with some of my basic annotation features like the rectangle. I'll draw one from scratch in a second, but if you already have one in another drawing, this is another great example where you could take this and copy it and go ahead and paste it into your project that we're just working on. So we can right click and paste. And a lot of these plan elements, I must not have that setting on. So I would make sure to turn on I don't think it was set that way last time. I would make sure to turn on the visibility of that so that way we can see it. And if you ever need to draw any of these from scratch, it's as simple as, oh, this is really strange. Now it's kind of showing. I can just go in and sketch this out using that placement. I can go ahead and change, the thickness. If it's a 6-inch thick wall, there's an example of a basic wall. All right, sorry those didn't show up super hot, but they should based on my display settings. Now, last step, I promise, we're almost there. The biggest thing that, again, you can save time with is to think about how you're going to print this. Remember, I mentioned earlier that we need to print all of this to scale. So I would recommend using drawing layout so that way you can set up like a title block and a basic layout of what you want this to look like. The first time you're in here, you're probably going to pick like just a basic template and then set your page setup to tabloid. So it's 11 by 17. I already have one set, so for time I'm going to pick it, and I will show you real quick in a minute where there is a knowledge base article that takes you step by step on how to create that first one. But here's kind of an example of what that page could look like. So many of these details, you could have, like a little basic logo or put the NKBA logo in here. One thing you'll note in the requirements, you're not supposed to put your name on anything, but imagine you could kind of mock up a scenario here and make sure this is set to 1/2-inch scale. So my goal here is to leverage the plans that I spent all that time building. I can go ahead and pick my floor plan, make sure that I set it to the correct scale, right? And say okay, and there it is. If this ever turns out where it doesn't quite fit or it's a little off, like the spacing is off, you can right click and you can move the image. You can come back and refresh it if you make changes. But now I know this first one is my floor plan view. Then I come back and I create a new tab, and the second one is going to be my next view. So I can come into my floor plans, and notice the naming here is super easy because I changed it back in the project. I know my mechanical plan versus my construction plan versus my elevation, and you just repeat throughout. Okay, let me do one more real quick so that way when we're considering printing these pages, the one downside is they print individual. So remember earlier I did mention that I would need to be able to print to PDF. So when I go to print, notice mine does default to PDF right here because I'm on Windows 10. If you're not on Windows 10, it's okay. You'll just uncheck this little box and go browse out to your PDF printer or download a PDF printer like PDF 995 or Cute PDF. There's a lot of free ones out there. That way I can come in and I can say, I want to print my drawing layouts. Now, even though I'm picking both of them, when I go to print this, it's still going to ask me to save it twice. So let me just go ahead and say, what was the first one? The floor plan probably. And then that one is printing to my desktop. And then it asks me again. And the second one, I think, was my mechanical plan. And I'll save that one. So these are now both out on my desktop. Let's go browse real quick out there and take a look. Floor plan, mechanical. So you'd repeat that for each page. Oops, the wrong screen. There we go. Now that I've got my pages, all of these can be merged together. If you don't have an extra special version of Adobe, you can very easily jump out to the web and use different free websites like ilovepdf.com, where they have a merge option where you literally can just go in and select your PDF files. If I go out to my desktop, here's my 2 plans. And you'll see a really easy preview. You can reorganize these to the order that you want. And then when you merge them all together, it will create like one completed packet. So much, much better presentation. If you haven't used that yet, it makes it a lot easier. Now, again, obviously, we had very limited amount of time today, so there was a lot to go through. Remember, today's examples were recorded, but I do want to mention a few of the things I talked about are on the Knowledge Center. So if you're not real familiar with some of those settings that I was creating, there's a lot of different resources out there. If you have any specific questions for me, you can reach me at residential.training@2020spaces.com. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for taking the time today. Have a good one.